Hello and welcome to anybody to this workshop. I must say I'm neither a historian nor an accounting scholar, so I think my perfect role here is just to introduce shortly the workshop and maybe thank in a substantial way most key persons that made it possible. As you probably know, whatever happens today would be unconceivable without, of course, the very seminal contribution of Richard Goldthwaite and Marco Spallanzani. We built fundamentally on their decades of work in taking note, in discovering sources and making a systematic census of them. So the whole thing started really from a notebook they had. They reported a huge amount of information over whatever was accessible from account books in Florence. From the early years, well beyond the date that we cover, which is the end of the 15th century, right? And the work of Richard and Marco is really the source of the work that was subsequently done. And if you don't mind, I will take a few minutes to read a very nice letter that Richard and Marco sent for this workshop. That also will summarize a little bit the history of how things came out. The letter is in Italian, but I think anybody here can understand anyway Italian, so I think it's no problem to read it directly in Italian. So this is the comment by Richard Goldthwaite and Marco Spallanzani to the database that we will present later. A noi dispiace molto non poter essere presenti a un incontro che ci procura una grande soddisfazione, ovviamente a livello personale e ancor più a livello professionale, visto il successo col quale Francesco ha trasformato il nostro censimento del tutto informale in un solido strumento di lavoro. Noi ci siamo dedicati allo studio della storia economica di Firenze, fine Medioevo, inizio età moderna, utilizzando in massima parte i libri contabili tenuti da operatori fiorentini, attivi a Firenze e nelle maggiori piazze europee. Questi libri si sono conservati in una quantità enorme che suscita stupore. A partire dal 1211 fino alla fine del 400 il loro numero supera ampiamente i 2000, mentre per altre grandi città italiane come Venezia, Genova e Milano bastano le dita delle due mani per contarli. Non è esagerato ritenere che il numero dei libri contabili fiorentini anteriori al 500 ecceda il totale degli stessi libri riferiti all'intera Europa. E poi, per complicare la situazione, quei libri sono sparsi ovunque, non soltanto a Firenze in archivi pubblici e privati, ma anche all'estero. Abbiamo trovato un libro nel lontano Giappone e un altro sul mercato librario tedesco, che per fortuna è stato microfilmato prima che sparisse nelle mani di un compratore sconosciuto. Ovviamente tutti questi libri contabili non sono mai stati riuniti in un solo inventario e gli stessi inventari esistenti lasciano molto a desiderare, poiché si tratta di un tipo di documento per il quale gli archivisti hanno una scarsa preparazione. Così molti anni fa, quando eravamo giovani, intorno al 1970, trovandoci di fronte a questa enorme quantità di fonti poco studiate, anzi poco conosciute e spesso mal catalogate in inventari quasi sempre manoscritti o dattiloscritti, abbiamo deciso di creare un nostro inventario esclusivamente per noi, per nostro uso personale. Col passare degli anni l'inventario cresceva e lentamente si trasformava. Da un lato cercavamo sempre di arricchirlo e di allargare l'arco temporale sino a comprendere tutto il Cinquecento, così sfondando una forte barriera istituzionale nello studio della storia di questo paese. Dall'altro cercavamo di organizzare il materiale in maniera più soddisfacente. Col passare degli anni, amici e colleghi italiani, soprattutto stranieri, hanno cominciato a contattarci per avere notizie e a tutti abbiamo risposto, sino a quando, poco tempo fa, abbiamo deciso di mettere l'inventario con tutti i suoi difetti, con tutti i suoi words, come si direbbe in inglese, a disposizione di tutti tramite Accademia IDU. Ma rimane un inventario informale, molto generale, non molto raffinato, contenente spesso indicazioni piuttosto generali. Adesso Francesco Bettarini, con il generoso sostegno di Massimo Warglien e dell'Università di Venezia, ha fatto ciò che per noi è sembrato un miracolo. Francesco è riuscito a trasformare il nostro modesto ma ambizioso inventario, almeno quella parte fino all'anno 1500, in un solido database nel quale ogni singolo libro di conti ha la sua voce specifica, contenente tutti i dettagli. Francesco vi spiegherà i particolari del suo vastissimo lavoro, ma noi, purtroppo in assenza, che siamo in grado di valutare la pazienza, la dedizione e la preparazione necessarie per condurre il progetto in porto, vogliamo assicurare a tutti voi qui presenti che Francesco ha messo a disposizione del mondo accademico uno strumento di lavoro essenziale per lo studio dell'economia, non soltanto di Firenze, ma considerata l'attività degli uomini d'affari fiorentini di tutta Europa, e ci piace qui sottolinearlo, della stessa Venezia. Sul nostro progetto Francesco ha fatto scendere le quinte dietro le quali noi siamo più che contenti di sparire. A Francesco e a Massimo vanno i nostri calorosi complimenti e l'augurio che il progetto vada avanti fino ad arrivare all'anno 1600. Una lettera davvero gentile e generosa e siamo molto grati di questa lettera. Più privatamente Richard ci ha anche comunicato peraltro alcune perplessità su come abbiamo annunciato questo evento che vorrei comunque riportarvi perché penso siano utili e aiutino la discussione. Richard diceva sarebbe bene sottolineare comunque anche in English again, it would be okay to stress the limitations of the database. In particular, three, and Francesco will have time to discuss that. One is, of course, that it ends with the year 1500. The reason being not academic, but just we ran out of money, fundamentally, right, to go beyond it, and we hope to go beyond that as soon as possible. The fact that it's based on inventory kind of information, not from direct inspection of documents, as Francesco will explain, we tried anyway to include in the database every other type of information based on direct inspection. And okay, these were the main points. The third is, of course, that it's an open tool that will be expanded over time by the contribution of other researchers. So I think these are important points. We will get back to them. And anyway, as you will see, they are already in the website where very soon the database will be there. I want also to thank my department, the Department of Management, and Chiara Saccon, who gave an incredible contribution to this project. And of course, the Center for Digital and Public Humanities in Venice, who has been organizing this event with us and has been contributing also to more refined tools for database query and search over this kind of data. Okay, the other important point, what is the census about and how we hope it will be used? We don't see it just as a census, but as a sort of tool that should grow over time to become a sort of hub for researchers that can go through it and not only find information of this huge number of sources, they grew up actually to more than 3,000 at the end, but also as a place where you can find links to the documents. This is not made now because digitalization of this document is still going on slowly, but it's happening. And actually the Prato archive will come today to explain us what they are doing, the Datini archive, which is quite amazing. So that we hope that with time we will be able to link items to the direct access to the digital version of those documents. And as other colleagues will explain today, we hope also this will also enable and facilitate work like applications of machine learning to facilitate automatic transcription and other important projects that might make all this initial seed a plant growing steadily and in a rich way. That's really what I wanted to say. So it was really to thank again Richard and Marco. In some sense, this event is a celebration of their work, and the database is by itself a grateful celebration of the amazing work they did. And to thank all the participants. We have an incredible, beautiful row of participants to the discussion today that I would like to thank in advance. And that's what I have to say. Thank you. Franz, I think it's up to you.
It's me. Okay. Yeah. I have not very much to add. So I'm just very glad to welcome everybody here to this symposium. And I think so. I welcome you on behalf of the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities at the Department for the Humanities at Foscari University of Venice. I'm very glad that Massimo Warglien and Francesco Bettarini made this connection to our center. So we came late into the play, 50 years late, or 5 decades late. And I would like to see this, as Massimo already explained, not as an endpoint of 50 years excellent research, but as a starting point for future developments. And only recently recently, my colleague Daniele Fusi started also to further develop the database, or to develop it into an actual database that is more functional, and then in the future to be able to entail and comprise even further resources and connect to other resources. And the presentation by Daniele Fusi will touch on these future options. So thank you very much for coming, and welcome. And I hand over to Chiara, I suppose.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I am Chiara Saccon. I'm an accounting scholar. My field of research is international accounting innovation, and also accounting history. Together with Massimo, I had the pleasure to supervise Francesco's Bettarini's work, and I could realize his authentic interest and passion in doing his research. It is a privilege to be here to participate to this multidisciplinary symposium, and welcome again all the speakers, and I thank all the speakers and the participants. But I'm not saying anymore. Instead, I leave the floor to Francesco. Francesco, you have to present your important census. Please, Francesco.
Thank you very much. Sharing. Hope you can see the PowerPoint.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Chiara. First of all, I would like to thank Massimo and Chiara for believing in this project and trust in my grant that I have spent here in Venice in the past year. The realization of complete census of the Florentine account books was possible thanks to the amazing researches led by Massimo, Marco Spallanzani and Richard Goldwith in about 50 years spent in public and private archives. The two scholars, keeping memories of their researches, had published about 2 years ago, a list of the businessmen and individual persons from Florence that had left these account sources. Everything started from there. My aim was to convert this list into a database, a source database, filling in all of the information that we can find actually in archive catalogs, and in so many studies that were done on this topic. Okay, what is included in this data set? We included all account writings produced by Florentine population out of institutional context. The timeline starts with the 13th century, specifically 1211 is the first account document that we know by now, and reaches the end of the 15th century for the reason that Massimo had explained before. When I say that these account writings are out of institutional context, I mean that we had not included but now everything that comes from the administration of political public institutions, religious and charity institutions. We consider here just everything that is coming from private and personal and family archives. The second definition was to identify who is a Florentine, a citizenship definition. We had considered in this dataset whoever calls himself as a Florentine or is included in the fiscal registers of the Florentine state, a larger dimension than the city inside the walls. Florentine state is the territorial state formed by all the communal districts that were subjected to the formal hegemony of the Florence government, including towns like Prato, Arezzo, and Pisa after the date of incorporation in the Florentine state. That was necessary because many important merchants, first of all, Francesco di Marco Datini, for example, before until 1385 was not granted by the Florentine citizenship, so he risked to be excluded from this data set. So we decided to expand it to the state, and we will see, maybe if we will have time, that from Arezzo we have heredited very important business archives, particularly from the merchant Bracci, that had left a considerable number of these sources. Finally, we have considered account writings produced and preserved inside or outside Florence, as we had heard from letter from Godwin and Spallanzani. Many of these account books are today preserved out of Italy, and they were produced out of Florence, in Barcelona, in Venice, in many towns from the 14th and the 15th century. So we had not done a distinction about the place and the preservation, the place of writing of these sources, but we have considered everything that was produced by Florentine people at the time. Where the sources are preserved, we have here in the slide a shorter list, but in the at Voice Other, there are a lot of other archives and libraries that today are preserving this documentation, but we can see that the most important are Archivio di Stato di Prato with the Datini archive and Archivio di Stato di Firenze that cover 2/3 of the complete number. The number of our dataset at this moment is 3,079 items. Something that was extraordinary when we had completed the job of research, starting from an estimation of 2,000 and so on. So the number is possible that will be increasing more in the future when we will decide to go also to many other archives that for now have not been studied before. Okay, once that we had the list from Godwin to Spallanzani, my job was to go to the catalogs and start researching all the information and details about every single item, every single source that we have. Account books that are preserved today come exclusively from two kinds of archives: family archives and religious and charity institutions archives. We have also, especially for the 13th century, fragments that come from books that today are preserved in a library collection, especially the Biblioteca Nazionale di Firenze, or the items for their exclusive interest at the time, and because they had lost their link with the producer archive, now are preserved in library, and we can consider, for example, in this case, the Peruzzi and Alberti ledgers that come from that are today part of collection in libraries. There is also in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze a serie called Libri di Commercio, that is a miscellaneous group of single account books that had lost their link to the archive where they come from, but the number for the 14th and 15th century is not so relevant. It's much more important for the 16th century. As I said, the two major parts are preserved now in family archives and religious and charity institutions archive. There is a number of account books that are today preserved in the archive of the descendants of the same producers at the time. We have in Florence the archivio Guicciardini, Ginori, many others in the city and outside the city that still today are preserving this kind of documents. The major part in the 20th century of this family archive was object of donation to the Archivio di Stato, but keeping in the organization of the archive their integrity and independence as they were before. So we can find many archives, family archives in the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, some other also in Prato, from this typology. Religious and charity institutions archive, it's very important, it's very interesting archival history, because this institution had inherited the documentation thanks to the last will and legacies of the producer of these accounts or the descendants of the producers. That is the case of, for example, for the Datini archive. Datini archive, we have to say immediately, is 1/3 of the complete number of the 3,079 items that I was saying before. So the reason why we have the complete archive from Datini is because this institution called Casa Pia dei Ceppi have inherited and preserved the archive as a part of the administration of the foundation of the institution itself. That is the reason why we have the Datini, we have the Bracci at the Fraternità dei Laici, and we have in Florence at Archivio di Stato in the serie called Corporazioni Religiose Soppresse, that come from religious and charity institutions that were abolished when Napoleon came from in Italy. I will show you, this is to describe the database layout, and then we have the possibility to show you a demo of it. Each row of the database is about the same item, the same account book, and information. Sorry, maybe someone that wants to join. Okay, all the informations are split in several columns where about the producer of the source and maybe and then the item itself. The first column that you find in the organization of the standard version of the census is called Ragione. You can find here the owner and the producer, or the producer and the producer of the account. That may be an individual person, a family, or a group of brothers, especially when we are talking about the administration of an heritage. And the third, obviously, a company or an individual firm when we have a business subject. In the second column, you will find the familia, then that is the family name of the producer, obviously, but also maybe could be the lineage of the majority partner of a company, of a partnership. The third column is about the profession. The profession is the one that is declared by the owner in himself description. It's important to say because this aspect was to identify the producer, the responsible of the account, but is not identifying the economic and the business that is mentioned in the account source. For example, we have the silk cloth producer Giovanni del Caccia that had left an account book as administrator of the Monte, that is this Florence office dedicated to the public debt administration. okay, the producer and the accountant is a silk cloth producer, but the accountant is not talking about silk, he's talking about the month administration. So this profession column is important just to identify the owner and producer of the account, but not the interest. The interest, thanks to the notes that were filled in the list by Goldwit and Spallanzani, are in the next two columns, contesto ed interesse, where we can find the geographical area of economic interest of the source, if different from Florence, obviously, and in the interesse, the economic interest described in the accounts. The second part of the database is about the content and the reason why the account was open. In the columns called attività and attività specifica, we are talking about the business declared by companies, firms in the source itself, and with a first important distinction. When people was taking account to describe it, to identify the family patrimonial administration and the personal and private one, we used to indicate in this column the voice domestico, patrimoniale, mercantile, because these people was using this source to collect business incoming, patrimony rentals incoming, daily cost for food and drink, and many other aspects of the daily life of these individuals, but was not so the source was not dedicated entirely to a specific business aspect. When this happens, we were able to indicate in this column, we are talking about a silk firm, a wool firm, a wool cloth firm, and so on. In the next column called Compagnia, we have the possibility when it was available the catalog, to identify the juridical nature of the agreement in the partnership in companies. I refer specifically in Compagnia or in Accomandita, there was this limited responsibility society, or individual firm when focusing entirely on a single business aspect. Then we have columns for the names of the partners when company is in, and the ragione precedente, that is the former name of the company inherited by a new one. Often this is important to identify the progress and the process of the archival structure of accounting books. The third part of the database is about the typology of document. We have obviously the archivio, where is preserved today, the collocazione, the codes, the catalog codes, the description, that is the physical features of the document itself. We have the luogo di scrittura, where these documents were written, and the name of the scrivano, the accountant, that could be different from the name of the producer, of the responsible of this account. Then we have these three columns about the typology of the account. Starting from the last one, we have when possible, included the original title of the account, or the first lines, the incipit of the account. The tipologia specifica is about the nature of this account that is described as it is described in the catalog. Just because, for example, ledger type of account is sometimes described with different names in catalogs. We had found debitori and creditori, dare avere, described with the color of the cover of the book, libro verde, libro rosso, libro giallo. We have decided to add a new column where these are standardized in a unique form that was Mastro, for example, starting from the ledger. And this was possible when the catalog had a detailed description of the source, and when Goldwith, Spallanzani, or myself had the possibility to touch physically each one, every source that was in object. Finally, the last columns are about the opening and closing date of the account that could be different from the source date, because sometimes we find in these accounts annotations that come from years that were apposed later, maybe 1 century later, especially in heritage administration. Then very interesting information that come from that we call esercizio, that is the original code that was appointed in the first account structure of the family business archive, and that producer were used to fill in using in alphabetical order the letters. We find the Mastro A, Mastro B, Mastro C, and this information is important because we can recognize when we have the possibility to preserve different typologies of accounting, like giornale, Mastro, or for the ricordanze or other kind of that kind. We have the possibility to individuate the esercizio A, and to track the organization of the accounting of a business company in the realization of the source itself. Finally, we have a column for edizione, when these sources were published in print or in monographic essay that are specifically dedicated to the source itself. And we will have, we hope in the future, the possibility to add a new column with a link to the image and to the digitalized source itself. Finally, I would like to show you as a demo. Okay. That is on Chrome. Eccolo qua. This is the demo of how will appear the database, our census on Fedra portal. We had decided to offer at the moment 4 kind of visualization of the database, but the database is also can be downloaded in Excel, I guess Excel format, and so everyone is able to organize the column, to work on it as they prefer. These 4 ways to show the database. There is one standard. You have just to click and it will be open. A standard one that is organized in alphabetical order for the name of the producer. And then you can find all the columns that I have described now. Okay, the second one visualization is what we call a chronological view. Not necessary to open now, but is organized in chronological, starting from the first one of the 1211 and to the last one. So you have the possibility to see immediately the chronological progression of the sources that are survived today. The third one is the esercizio, was suggested by Goldwaite, and this I would like to show you. Okay, you have always the organization, on the alphabetical order of the ragione, of the producer, but you have immediately, when we have more than one source for the same producer, you have the possibility to organize the sources that are preserved by typology. You have the giornale, the mastro, and the esercizio code that I was talking about before, and the chronological order. So you can immediately see for esercizio which sources are preserved for the same business or individual or family that is in the census. Finally, we offer now a fourth kind that is organized for the attività. When you can find immediately the accounting books organized for, we have starting from A with albergatori to the last one in alphabetical order, so you can immediately study and search for the sources that are talking about hosting, they're talking about wool producing, talking about silk, and so on. And that's it. We hope to improve, thanks to the scholar that will approach these sources, because we in the Fedra portal we will show my personal email address, just to have the possibility to collect the corrections or the improvements of the database, and working regularly on the editing of the database, that will be better and better year by year, day by day. So, and that's it. Thank you. I don't know who is. Maybe Daniele.
See, so thank you very much, Francesco, and I just want to hand over to Daniele Fusi, who was a fellow in the field of digital textual scholarship at our center, and doing an excellent job as a research software engineer. And I forgot to thank also the colleagues from the CNR in Pisa, Angelo Del Grosso and Federico Boschetti, who have worked in the last day on the application on the servers of the CNR in Pisa. So thank you very much for this. And Daniele will now give an introduction to this new prototype. And I want to remind everything, we are recording this presentations. So please be aware, if you participate in the discussion, that this will be then published on our YouTube channel. So nothing to be afraid of, but just to make you aware of this. And we will share as far as possible all links and all the materials on our website, on our GitHub website of the Venice Center for Digital Public Humanities. You will find the links on our website. Okay, thank you very much. And Daniele.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. In this presentation, I'd like to focus on some trivial yet essential aspects in making digital editions, and namely the importance of structured content. And of course, that's really useless for DH people, but here we assume a much broader public, so bear with me. And a good reason to do so is given by the original digital format of this project. The legacy data for this project comes in the form of a simple spreadsheet, as we have seen, and that's a fine starting point, but it has many shortcomings in the long run. First of all, with a single huge document as a downloaded file or a static web page, you are forced to search across all data at once. And this may be not always optimal. And also the flat table structure implies that often the same data are repeated across rows, and that's redundant with the added risk of typing errors. And further, the same data types may get repeated across columns. For instance, here we have many partners for each act in a row. And to cope with this in a flat table, we have two columns, socio 1 and socio 2, for a first and a second partner, and a third column for all the other partners. And of course, that's both redundant and against data atomicity, because one cell no more contains just one datum. And in more general terms, atomicity here is broken wherever we have more data than columns, like for instance, with several categories in a single column, pizzicagnolo and speziale and the like. And finally, filtering and searching data happens by their display value, that is just like they are written. So for instance, Nicolò with a grave accent is different from Nicolò without it, or with an acute accent instead. And often users, of course, can know in advance the orthographic conventions adopted, and their search might fail just for this reason. And all these, as you can see, may provide an impaired filtering and search experience for the end users. So if you want a better digital edition, first of all, we must remodel our data, reducing redundancy and restoring atomicity, so that each datum can be searched either individually or in combination. And we must also filter the text to prepare it for search by removing all the rumor features from it, as we have seen from the example of Nicolò. And we may also want to provide a dynamic rather than static publication, either it's a file or a static page. Of course, you can also get still the whole data on demand, but also freely and interactively browse any portion of them and combine several filtering criteria to get faster to the point. And finally, we should have just one content for several different publications. So for instance, a user interface for humans via web applications, but also services targeting machines rather than humans through web API, where data and functions get published on the web to be consumed by other software, or even plan to enhance data with ontologies for the semantic web. For instance, here is how data gets remodeled from a list of a set of interconnected entities using a tiny software tool I created for this purpose, which converts the spreadsheet into a true database. The source table here gets analyzed and remodeled into sets of entities. And so, for instance, our main entities like the ads are included in another entity, which is the book. And in turn, the book is in an archive, which has a type and a subtype, was written by a person in some place. And all these are entities. And the ads have categories, type and subtype, may have a place, may have a family and a company, are related to professions, and may include partners. So each entity here is in its own set, so that we don't mix different entities, nor repeat them. So for instance, you can see that a unique list of persons gets connected to all the other entities requiring a person, like books, where persons are writers, or acts, where persons are partners. And this level of isolation, of course, grants the possibility of searching among each set independently or freely combining multiple search criteria. So this early draft application shows the results in terms of the user experience. Now we have a single small page with an interactive list using the filtering to focus on desired data and paging to avoid the huge lists, which would be difficult to manage. Yet we can still provide full data export capabilities in several formats. We can combine a number of filters at will, like family, company, place, book, years, description, categories, professions, persons, and the like. And finally, we can navigate from the list to a specific item's details. Now, to let you play with this concept, I prepared a very raw and unpolished demo at this address. You can open now this from your browser if you want. That's a temporary site allowing you to realize the benefits provided by a more structured content with respect to the initial spreadsheet or to a static web page. A true application, of course, would allow you to see data from many different endpoints, connect these multiple views together, provide partial or total data export, have a polished and prettier user interface, and much more than just a raw test, which should get you to the point. So as a sample, for instance, we can filter by a family, Datini, and get the results. And further, we can refine these results by picking, for instance, a different type, in this case, finanziario, mercatile finanziario. And again, we may want to limit the list to acts located in a specific place. For instance, in this case, we are looking for acts located in Avignone, and so forth, up to the desired data. So as you can see, that's much easier and details are always available. Now, in this context, a digital edition is much more than digitized text. We start from a highly structured content independent from its presentation, and some software logic is provided to manipulate this data. We can also publish the software itself as packages, and is a kind of tools publication. But usually this logic is wrapped in a web interface, an API for machine consumption. And we can have any number of web or native user interfaces consuming the API, making it available to human users. So we can have as many applications as we want connected to the same API, sharing thus the functions and data it publishes. And other projects may connect to our API, providing another application, or even build another core based on ours, or publish another API based on ours, which may be in turn could feed another user interface, and so forth. As you can see here, publication promotes a sort of virtual circle where each project can rely on existing ones, integrating them as needed. Of course, we can also export the whole data, which can be integrated into other databases, or even use our database as the basis for publishing ontologies in semantic web. So we are going to build a network of data, services, and tools where the power of data is multiplied by the power of the network. And all this networked set of data, services, and tools represents the publication, which promotes the convergence of different projects and makes an edition more digital, in my opinion. So that's the plan for the future in this project, and that's all for my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Can you please post the link to the demo also in the chat so people can play around with what you created? I think that would be the easiest. Okay, Francesco, do you take over for the next section? Your microphone.
Ok,
yeah.
Yes. Procedo in italiano presentando Leonardo Meoni, che è il direttore dell'archivio di Stato di Prato, e che appunto sia per l'importanza che ricopre l'archivio Datini nel numero complessivo delle fonti contabili che sono state inserite in questo database, sia per il progetto di digitalizzazione che è nato e di cui ci parlerà, ricopre un certo molto interesse e molto anche aspettativa nell'incontro di oggi. Quindi prego Leonardo.
Grazie, grazie. Buonasera a tutti. Innanzitutto un ringraziamento a Foscari e a Francesco Bettarini in particolare per l'invito. Per l'Archivio di Stato di Prato è un'occasione preziosa per presentare in un consesso così importante il nostro istituto, i nostri progetti ed in particolare il progetto di messa online dei libri contabili datiniani che comincia piano piano a prendere forma e concretezza. Prima di entrare nel merito del tema del mio intervento vorrei offrire alcune informazioni di contesto, credo utili ad inquadrare l'ambito in cui ci muoviamo. E partirei dal codice dei beni culturali che regola la vita dei nostri istituti. L'articolo 101 del codice afferma che gli istituti ed i luoghi della cultura che appartengono a soggetti pubblici, gli archivi di Stato per esempio, istituti periferici del Ministero per i beni e le attività culturali e per il turismo, sono destinati alla pubblica fruizione ed espletano un servizio pubblico. Ora, non è mia intenzione annoiarvi con riferimenti normativi che sono anche lontani dai temi di questa giornata, ma voglio partire da qui perché tutto quello che vi dirò da ora in poi trova proprio origine e fondamento in espressioni come pubblica fruizione e servizio pubblico. Espressioni che nascondono concetti importanti, densi, ricchi di significato, spesso sottovalutati e che costituiscono o che dovrebbero costituire il fondamento del progettare e dell'operare dei nostri istituti e luoghi di cultura. Anche il bel lavoro che viene presentato stasera, la messa online del censimento delle fonti contabili fiorentine, va senz'altro in questa direzione, mettendo a disposizione della comunità scientifica un utile strumento di accesso alla documentazione. In questo quadro generale si inserisce l'Archivio di Stato di Prato, con le sue peculiarità e la sua particolare storia, che rende questo istituto, possiamo dire, unico nel panorama che vi ho appena descritto. Fin dalle origini, nel 1957, ebbe sede nel Palazzo Trecentesco, un tempo abitazione del mercante Francesco di Marco Datini, che venne restaurato appositamente per la nuova destinazione. Nel palazzo, che già conservava l'archivio del mercante e dell'ente di beneficenza da lui creato per volontà testamentaria, furono fatti confluire all'epoca i più importanti nuclei archivistici della città. Per usare una felicissima espressione di Diana Toccafondi, a lungo direttrice del nostro Archivio di Stato, possiamo dire che in Palazzo Datini si realizza una piena e rara coerenza tra contenitore e contenuto. Il grande archivio del mercante e tutta la memoria storica della città riuniti insieme nello stesso luogo. Entro adesso nel cuore del mio intervento presentando quello che ne è il protagonista, il fondo archivistico del mercante pratese Francesco di Marco Datini. È certamente il più rappresentativo del nostro istituto, universalmente noto e consultato da studiosi di tutto il mondo, in quanto costituisce una fonte formidabile per innumerevoli percorsi di ricerca. Il fondo contiene documenti di amministrazione e carteggi appartenuti allo stesso mercante che testimoniano in massima parte la vastissima attività svolta in campo industriale, commerciale, bancario dalle varie aziende cui egli dette vita. I numeri. Il fondo consta di oltre 1100 registri contabili e di circa 150.000 lettere, coprendo un arco cronologico che va dal fine degli anni 60 del XIV secolo al secondo decennio del XV secolo. Una consistenza così straordinaria rende il Fondo Datini l'archivio mercantile più grande al mondo per il Medioevo. A partire dal 1383 Francesco comincia a creare un sistema di aziende. Ad Avignone, infatti, si aggiungono in ordine cronologico Prato, Pisa, Firenze, che avrà la direzione generale di tutto il sistema, Genova ed infine le piazze catalane, Barcellona, Valenza e Maiorca. All'interno dell'Archivio Datini, per dare un'idea dell'estensione di queste reti relazionali, sono stati censiti circa 4.400 mittenti e oltre 400 località di provenienza delle lettere. Già i primi riordinatori, subito dopo il fortunoso ritrovamento del 1870 e poi nei primi 2 decenni del Novecento, danno all'archivio quella forma che tuttora conserva, fondata sulla ripartizione della documentazione per fondaco. Da ricordare poi lo straordinario lavoro guidato da Federico Melis negli anni 50, un'onda lunga questa che porterà frutti diretti e indiretti nei decenni successivi. fra i quali senz'altro il grande lavoro di inventariazione analitica iniziato nel 1981 e portato avanti e guidato da Elena Cecchiaste. Un lavoro eccezionale, questo per qualità e quantità, che ci ha consegnato la schedatura completa delle singole lettere e dei registri contabili, anche utilizzando in maniera pionieristica, visti gli anni di cui stiamo parlando, strumenti informatici. Operazione anche questa che non è andata a toccare la struttura, l'impianto per fondaci dell'archivio. L'archivio quindi è articolato secondo gli 8 principali fondaci datiniani, corrispondenti ad altrettante sedi aziendali che costituiscono le articolazioni dell'archivio e l'ossatura dell'ordinamento. Ciascun fondaco è suddiviso in 2 grandi sezioni, i libri contabili, a loro volta suddivisi nelle tradizionali serie tipologiche, ma sempre nella descrizione individuando le compagnie a cui si associano, e il carteggio ricevuto, ordinato per luogo di provenienza, poi per mittente e infine cronologicamente. Fuori dallo schema fondaco aziende ci sono alcune altre sezioni, fra cui il cosiddetto carteggio privato e il carteggio specializzato. Allora, questo è il sito del fondo Datini. Possiamo vedere, se io diciamo vado nella parte dell'albero, consultare l'albero, possiamo vedere la struttura appunto che vi ho appena descritto, la struttura per fondaco, e aprendo un singolo fondaco possiamo vedere le 2 diciamo grandi sezioni che vi ho appena menzionato: i libri contabili, a loro volta appunto suddivisi nelle tradizionali serie tipologiche, e il carteggio ricevuto per fondaco, per provenienza, come ho appena detto, e poi per mittente, infine cronologicamente. In fondo, come possiamo vedere, alcune altre sezioni, fra cui il cosiddetto carteggio privato e il carteggio specializzato. Era doveroso, direi indispensabile, prima di affrontare il racconto delle campagne di digitalizzazione, accennare alle operazioni di ordinamento e soprattutto al grande lavoro di descrizione e di inventariazione analitica di pressoché tutta la documentazione portato avanti da Elena Cecchi. Doveroso perché su questo straordinario lavoro si innestano e trovano significato le successive campagne di digitalizzazione. La prima di queste campagne, il progetto Datini, la digitalizzazione cioè delle 150.000 lettere del carteggio, venne elaborata dall'Archivio di Stato di Prato, in particolare grazie alla competenza, alla passione e la tenacia dell'allora direttrice Diana Toccafondi, e ottenne nel 1999 un cospicuo finanziamento dallo Stato, circa 1,5 miliardi di lire, con i fondi della quota dell'8 per 1000 dell'IRPEF a diretta gestione statale. Il grande impegno di digitalizzazione dello sterminato carteggio datiniano, protrattosi dal 2000 al 2007, poggia sulla solita base descrittiva preesistente e da questa trae valore e significato. Di più, non avrebbe avuto senso immaginare una campagna di digitalizzazione di questo tipo senza il lavoro di schedatura capillare di Elena Cecchi e della sua equipe. Sarebbero mancate le gambe su cui reggersi. Proviamo per dire, siamo qua abbiamo aperto il fondaco di Avignone, la prima parte i libri contabili, come vediamo il carteggio è la seconda parte, questa diciamo è la parte oggetto della prima campagna importante di digitalizzazione, il progetto Datini, che ha preso appunto i primi anni del 2000. Possiamo vedere, aprendo la suddivisione, possiamo arrivare fino alla singola lettera schedata ovviamente, e associate ci sono le immagini della lettera. Quindi possiamo arrivare fino all'immagine della lettera. Il progetto Datini è stato attuato attraverso vari passi che vi sintetizzo. La creazione di un archivio di immagini mediante la digitalizzazione di tutto il carteggio, 150.000 lettere, il recupero e l'importazione dei dati descrittivi frutto del lavoro di inventariazione di Elena Cecchi, presenti su una precedente database, il controllo e l'implementazione di tutti i dati descrittivi, la realizzazione di un sistema informatizzato di archiviazione, consultazione e restituzione, la creazione di metadati descrittivi in formato XML, la creazione di un'uscita web dedicata con caratteri di accessibilità e fruibilità. Il progetto, come vi ho detto, iniziato nel 2000, è stato terminato nel dicembre 2006 e dal 2008 il progetto è stato messo in rete. La versione attuale, quella che vedete del 2014, è il risultato di una completa reingegnerizzazione con la migrazione dell'intera banca dati su una nuova piattaforma. Alcuni dati riepilogativi del progetto che danno l'idea della dimensione e dell'importanza. Sono state prodotte 361.474 immagini relative a 148.265 documenti, il carteggio, corredate di altrettante schede descrittive. 1.173 invece le schede descrittive relative ai libri contabili. Un progetto importante, quindi, che è riuscito a intercettare fondi statali cospicui e soprattutto ha reso possibile, attraverso il collegamento dell'archivio delle immagini alla banca dati, effettuare da remoto ricerche complesse fino ad arrivare all'immagine del singolo documento. Ovviamente una banca dati così completa, comprensiva anche delle schede dei registri contabili, portava con sé, come naturale sviluppo, la digitalizzazione della documentazione contabile. Problemi di reperimento di fondi hanno costituito il principale ostacolo alla sua veloce realizzazione. Nel frattempo, infatti, le dinamiche economiche generali e di conseguenza le capacità di investimento statale su certi progetti sono completamente cambiate. Quello che è mancato in capacità di investimento è stato colmato, possiamo proprio dirlo senza scadere in una retorica a buon mercato, dall'interesse o addirittura dall'amore che uno straordinario patrimonio documentario come l'Archivio di Datini può suscitare. Alcuni anni fa due studiosi giapponesi, i dottori e coniugi Suishi e Hitomi Tsunaga, coppia nella vita e nel lavoro, dopo anni di attività professionale e ragionieristica in Giappone, una volta in pensione scoprono e si interessano alla figura di Francesco Datini e al suo straordinario archivio. Questo loro interesse li porta a Prato, nel nostro archivio, a contatto con i registri contabili datiniani. Ed è un interesse che cresce e si sviluppa, tanto da pensare di trasferirsi a Prato per buona parte dell'anno, per meglio dedicarsi agli studi sulla contabilità medievale attraverso i libri del Fondo Datini, appunto. Si sviluppa così e si consolida in questi ultimi anni una collaborazione stretta e proficua fra i coniugi Tsunaga e l'Archivio di Stato di Prato, ed essi propongono, nell'ambito dei propri studi, di fotografare i registri contabili dell'Archivio Datini, con una prospettiva iniziale di numerosi anni di lavoro, per metterli poi a disposizione della comunità. È iniziata così una lenta ma continua opera di digitalizzazione tuttora in corso. Questo è stato il seme iniziale, molto particolare, che è riuscito ad innescare un meccanismo virtuoso che sta cominciando a portare frutto. Al momento vari elementi, anche molto diversi fra loro, attorno a quel seme iniziale, stanno cercando di integrarsi e di operare con la prospettiva di portare a termine questo progetto. Alla generosa, paziente e pervicace spinta iniziale di due studiosi giapponesi si è aggiunto nel tempo lo sforzo da parte del nostro istituto, per esempio nel cercare fondi anche sul territorio, in modo da dare gambe e vigore all'operazione. Un vero e proprio cambio di strategia nell'impostare e affrontare le due campagne di digitalizzazione, dettato essenzialmente da un cambio di scenario e dal conseguente bisogno di aprire nuove e altre strade. La digitalizzazione della documentazione epistolare nei primi anni 2000 ha potuto godere di un sostegno finanziario statale corposo e completo. Per la digitalizzazione dei registri contabili, l'attuale progetto, è stato d'obbligo puntare ad una collaborazione fra più soggetti e anche cercare di far convergere più progetti sull'obiettivo. Cerco di spiegarmi. Al lavoro fotografico paziente e costante degli studiosi giapponesi abbiamo affiancato, per esempio, un piccolo laboratorio fotografico interno creato in Archivio di Stato, con l'intenzione, rosicchiando ovviamente tempo, energie e risorse umane ad altre attività, di dare un contributo alla digitalizzazione dei registri contabili. Si è aggiunto da parte nostra, come appena accennato, anche uno sforzo nella ricerca di fondi sul territorio per specifici progetti, mirati al miglioramento della fruizione e alla valorizzazione della documentazione conservata presso l'Archivio di Stato di Prato. E in questo caso abbiamo riscontrato l'appoggio di una fondazione bancaria locale, la Fondazione Cassa di Risparmio di Prato. Un altro progetto, in collaborazione con il CNR, Opera del Vocabolario Italiano, e con il contributo di Regione Toscana, si sta ponendo come obiettivo la ricostruzione della rete di persone, luoghi, attività e relazioni presenti nel territorio pratese a partire dal Medioevo e a partire principalmente dalla documentazione presente nel nostro archivio. Quindi, in sintesi, più strumenti in campo e vari progetti, anche diversi, ma complementari, che abbiano delle aree e degli obiettivi comuni, che portino così a massimizzare le risorse umane ed economiche a disposizione. Una strategia che si sta dimostrando abbastanza efficace nel caso della digitalizzazione dei registri contabili, perché sta portando lentamente ma costantemente registri digitalizzati e una quantità di fondi via via sufficiente a lavorare le immagini realizzate e metterle online. Ovviamente tutto ciò è possibile perché, e mi ripeto, alla base c'è già uno straordinario lavoro di inventariazione del quale le immagini prodotte sono il giusto completamento. E a tal proposito approfitto di questa giornata per annunciare in anteprima la messa online del primo nucleo di registri contabili. Sono una quindicina di libri dell'attività mercantile del Fondaco di Firenze, ognuno abbinato alla propria scheda descrittiva, già presente e visualizzabile attraverso uno sfogliatore digitale. È una sorta, diciamo, di ringraziamento per l'invito ricevuto e per l'opportunità che ci avete offerto di far conoscere il nostro lavoro. Allora, cerchiamo di riaprire l'albero, andiamo al Fondaco di Firenze, libri contabili dell'attività mercantile, apriamo per esempio i libri di mercanzie e vediamo che, diciamo, da oggi la scheda di questo registro contabile porta un link, un sfoglia, si apre uno sfogliatore digitale e ovviamente è possibile sfogliare il registro contabile con una buona risoluzione, come possiamo vedere, quindi credo sia uno strumento efficace e importante per la comunità scientifica. Ovviamente abbiamo accelerato in questo ultimo mese i tempi proprio per annunciare oggi la messa online, quindi ci scusiamo per qualche piccola o forse anche grande sbavatura figlia della fretta che cercheremo ovviamente di aggiustare nei prossimi giorni, nei prossimi tempi. Questi sono ovviamente i primi 15 registri, cercheremo con diciamo costanza di aggiungere via via altra documentazione. Il problema ovviamente si capisce dalla natura del progetto, dalla genesi del progetto, che è un progetto abbastanza casalingo, ecco, diciamo così, quindi le immagini prodotte hanno bisogno in ogni caso prima di essere messe online di una lavorazione che ha dei costi, quindi la messa online dipende diciamo, dal flusso di fondi che piano piano arrivano e vanno a implementare quindi questo lavoro e questo progetto. Però diciamo, siamo partiti e siamo diciamo, fiduciosi di dare un contributo importante alla comunità scientifica con questo strumento. Una riflessione finale, e concludo, riprendo una bella riflessione di Diana Toccafondi dicendo che il movimento ha caratterizzato e creato l'archivio Datini. In una prima fase le carte hanno percorso i vari nodi della fitta rete commerciale che univa il bacino del Mediterraneo e non solo, Il loro compito era veicolare le preziose informazioni di vario genere e tutte funzionali all'attività del mercante. Un secondo movimento, questa volta centripeto, ha portato le carte dai vari fondaci, le lettere, ma anche i registri contabili ovviamente, verso il cuore del sistema aziendale datiniano, nelle mani dello stesso Francesco, sostanzialmente per ragioni di controllo e verifica finale. Questo secondo movimento verso il centro è quello che ha formato l'archivio che conserviamo. Poi l'assenza di movimento, la quiete secolare, il nascondersi. Adesso, soprattutto attraverso la digitalizzazione e la rete, le carte si rimettono virtualmente in viaggio verso il mondo, cariche di informazioni non solo sulla vita economica, e questo è il valore straordinario di questo archivio, non solo sulla vita economica, ma anche sociale e sulla mentalità dell'epoca. Grazie.
Grazie a Leonardo Meoni, il direttore ci ha fatto vedere anche visivamente in questa prima anteprima della pubblicazione online dei libri contabili Datini. Per quanto mi riguarda è emozionante vederli online per la prima volta. Vi ringrazio per avercelo fatto in questa occasione.
Indeed, that's great news. And so we have actually 2 launches today. So we are heading towards a great, bright future in bringing these resources together. So it will take some time, of course. It's a laborious way, but we can be pretty confident, and that's exactly the right moment to introduce you to our second guest speaker this evening or late afternoon, to Professor Georg Vogeler from the University of Graz, from the Zentrum für Informationsmodellierung, how digital humanities have been labeled in the earlier days of digital humanities. So a very important center of competences in the field of digital humanities. And he has the chair for digital humanities and studied as an historian for, especially in his historical auxiliary sciences, the Hilfswissenschaften in Freiburg, in Breisgau and Munich. In 2002, Georg received his PhD with a study on late medieval text registers from German territories. And in 2016, he has been awarded the Venia Docendi for his habilitazione on the use of the charters of Federico II by his contemporaries in Italy. His research interests are, and he widely publishes in the field of late medieval administrative records, the diplomatics of the charters of Federico II, digital diplomatics, digital editions, and the application of semantic web technologies to humanities research questions. He has received several international grants in the field, and between
Grazie.
No, Georg, but I mean, you have an impress. Okay. Okay, you are right. We need the time for the discussion. That's the last thing I want to say. There will be, I hope, enough room for discussions, also for questions for the previous presentations. So, yeah, Georg, thank you very much for being here virtually. You are supposed to be here physically, but I mean, under these conditions, we are glad that we can now listen to your presentation, lightning talk on the state of the art of editing account books. Gregor, the floor is Georg, the floor is yours. We still see your presentational mode. So as a presenter, Georg. If you share your screen. Oh, I can't hear you either. Maybe you try to reshare your screen, and then you can choose the presentation instead of the presentator mode.
Maybe Georg, you have to switch on the microphone.
Okay, sorry. Now I'm back.
Yeah.
And we are seeing your
Yeah.
the
Can you hear me?
presentator. Yeah, we can hear you, and we can see the presentator mode. If you switch to presentation mode,
Let me check.
yeah. If you unshare and share again, and then just share the presentation itself.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. We saved some time when you interrupt me introducing.
Yeah. But I have a problem sharing the correct screen because don't know why.
You should have all the options to share.
I know that problem is that it's sharing. Come on. Let's see if I can share. It worked already earlier.
Yeah, yeah, that's strange.
So let's do it this way.
Something is happening. Oh, wow. Yeah, here we go.
Sorry.
No problem.
Well, yeah, okay. The emotional introduction I started is gone away by the muted microphone. Anyway, the historic accounts are somehow a peculiar genre to be edited because there are two main approaches to it, which might be very famous in Venice. The one approach, and probably both approaches, because you can consider these kind of documents from two perspectives. One would be the perspective Frederick Kaplan and Isabella Di Leonardo trying to explain in their paper on big data of the past, where they say, okay, historic accounts are just data. There are data format of data storage which is a bit outdated in the current days, but it's basically the same. There is interest in recording in single entries and calculating with them, etc. While there a different approach by usually medieval historians. Very often I cited two people who explicitly stated that the codicology of the document is of high importance, and demonstrated this in single cases. In their case, it was Burgundian accounts, where you see when you work with the physical object and the paleography, you learn lots of things. And both approaches are somehow contradicting. Let's start with the first approach. First approach can be easily translated, looking at this kind of spreadsheet on the left side, into what was a very early use of computers, not the earliest. The spreadsheet software were developed in the 70s, where you could say, okay, I have a spreadsheet on the left side and converting it to a spreadsheet on the right side, where is the difference? That's the approach, the big data approach, where they say, okay, we have better technology available, digital technology, so let's convert this old technology into the new technology. Having a deeper look in this completely random example tells us the problems. Because looking at this, you see immediately, without being able to read it, that you would have to have in your calculation spreadsheet software something which tells us this entry is cancelled, in the sense of it's copied into another ledger. Or on the right side, you see lots of additional additions, where you see the second column from the right single letters which were deleted later on, probably documenting individual payments and stuff like this. So this document, this account book, is not only a table, a spreadsheet, it's also something where people work with it. And by working with it, you create it, you add information to it, which is important to understand what people meant by this document. That's the second approach. This double approach is something which has established itself slowly in the field of scholarly editing, in particular in the digital world. In the print world, the codicological, paleographical approach is probably the more dominant. The calculation approach, there were some people printing their books, their account books in the late 19th century in a style which is copying the spreadsheet, although they did not copy the real impression of the documents, but they considered these kinds of documents as spreadsheets, etc. But as I said, print editions usually have a codicological, paleographical approach. In digital editions, in recent years, this has cleared. It took, I was highly astonished when I started 5 years ago to do a bit of research on it, how few of the digital editions of account books did something you would have expected of them, that they were able to calculate with the accounts. Here I have put very recent publication, digital publication, which is not that interesting for people knowing the Datini archive, 18th century, who cares? But similar enough, and you see which is the crucial point, that they decided to do both. That they decided to have a transcription of the document and a database version of the document. This reflects something I would like to explain on this with this graphics. This reflects the general approach, the general problem we have to deal with. We have to deal with the problem that the historians are using archival documentation for their research, that they create their with the methodology, they use their tables, their spreadsheets to calculate, to do statistics, to know how much people spend on specific commodities, how much people they invested in buying goods in Barcelona or in the Levantine or whatever, they do this by extracting it from the archival documentation. And we have seen now that they have access to this by digital images. They can have access to this by scholarly editions, which is kind of intermediate, where we have methods well established, which are fitting very good to this paleographical approach. They do this to do something which is again on the other side, which is on this big data side approach, because they are interested in the people who created these documentations and who about these documentations tell the stories. And the methodology for digital editions should take this into account. And I will try to show you in two examples now that how I think these general approach to historic accounts can be solved with digital methods. If I'm talking too fast, there's a paper from me recently where you can read some of these things more easily. Or in calm. The first project I want to present you is a project we are currently working on in Graz. Christopher Pauline, who is in the audience, who can tell you the details on this. It's a project we are realizing in cooperation with American colleagues. The American colleagues got a big grant to create a scholarly edition platform, a generic scholarly edition platform, and we are helping them with the part of historical accounts. There's a significant group interested in accounts in this collaboration, but we're using not only this data, which is mostly 19th and 18th, 19th and 20th century American accounts, but we are collaborating with people we just meet. For example, this is an American PhD student, James Haar, who's working on Paris tax registers of the 14th century. And I took this as an example, where we create a scholarly edition somehow in representing both approaches we have seen with the Spengler. There is a transcription on the left side, done by James Haar. You could go to the images as well. James is providing them. And there is a spreadsheet representing the same information. There is even some functionality to work with this spreadsheet called a data basket, where you can collect single entries and collect them to export them into your Excel sheet, downloadable to work with them, to continue your work with them. This is based on the technologies I have shown you in the slide before. So it's based on TI transcriptions. See on the left side, I don't show the TI in itself, but it's obvious it's just transcription. And it's based on the resource description framework, which is the technology recommended by the W3C for data publication. It's the very flexible way to represent structured data, somehow close to relational data models. So I wouldn't expect any substantial problems in converting your database, the census database. It's something similar, but dedicated to be publishable on the web and to be referenced and reused on the web. This technology has several advantages. First advantage is the basic simple advantage that it is you can reuse data easily. Second advantage, not very surprising, it is a database. So you can extract information you need to calculate something like the left side, where I extracted a bubble graph from the number of entries connected to specific commodities in a plantation account. It's the shop of the planter where he sold stuff to slaves and surrounding farmers. And to see them, one of the major commodities he sold is gunpowder and shot. Well, not surprising from our imagination of the United States. Anyway, it's this kind of calculation is not bound to RDF. The interesting thing about this is that it's not only one collection, but it's several collections which could be combined. And on the right side, you see a search for rum, which is a commodity not only sold in this plantation, but also sold in a shop of a merchant in Providence, in the east, on the east coast, which is edited by somebody else. And it's now presented in our platform, but by being RDF, it does not have to be in our platform. It could be in several platforms. The major advantage of RDF is that if you use the same URLs to describe the concept of rum, you could connect databases in several databases on the web. In fact, there are several possibilities beyond this, because the ability of RDF to describe knowledge systems is very high. So you can create taxonomies of commodities, for example, and say, okay, we have lots of commodities related to guns, to weapons. We have other commodities related to textiles. We have commodities related to food, etc. And you could combine them and reuse this kind of taxonomies to search through your sources. The second example I want to show you is an example which is now closer to the period of the Florence registers. The city of Leuven has a rich series of municipal account books, starting in the mid of the 14th century, going to the end of the Ancien Regime. And they are producing images and scholarly editions or editions from them. You see here the three standard representations, what you could expect from this: an image of an opening page, and in the middle the transcription in TI, where sharp eyes might distinguish a first part as a pure paragraph and the second part as a table, which is connected to the left side, where it's obviously there's some tabular style writing in the lower part with the text of the entry and the amount of the entry separated. And on the right side, you have the translation into a readable page, doing precisely this. The interesting thing about this activity is not so much this kind of visual repetition of the book, but the process behind. And the process behind is something a master student currently in Cologne is executing, experimenting. He takes the images and uses automatic technologies, machine learning technologies, to convert the images into written text. Handwritten text recognition is something which has made lots of advances in the recent years, and he can build on this. He can build on this to come to something which is not the database we have seen in the DepChart project, but is more the presentation of the page and the text. He is doing, by the way, Jan Bigalke is in the audience as well, so any questions, please directly to him. He is converting these images into plain text with references to the coordinates on the page, and then converting these coordinates into logical structures, identifying table rows and table columns, identifying paragraphs. And in fact, he suggests, and his master thesis has to be handed in, so he won't realize probably, well, he should do a PhD on it later on, to identify roles of these sections, functions of these sections, which would be coming much closer to the database I have talked about earlier. So you see this annotation segment on the left side. In fact, he has an advantage. He can stay and stick to his process with the structural analysis on the lower side, because the city of Leuven is in one perspective unique. It has a very, very active community of citizens, Leuven citizens, supporting the work of the archives. So he could, for example, reuse existing transcriptions done by people, volunteers, local volunteers who are just working, liking this kind of documents and transcribing them. There is a web-based tool to support them in transcriptions and to publish them. They are even doing digitalizations for the archives. So the most important thing, or the second important thing about the City Archives of Leuven scholarly edition is, apart from this machine learning approach, an approach, a citizen science approach, an approach which involves people who are not officially paid for this stuff, just by interest. I would like to summarize in a third perspective on the, or fourth perspective on this current state of scholarly editions. Not only this kind of contributing to the creation by scholarly editions, by automatic text recognition and transcription, not only by doing scans, but by understanding that there are several steps involved. And these steps can be combined and should be combined in the work, in the creation of scholarly editions. They can be combined by the work you are doing, Francesco is doing, by creating references of 3,000 possible candidates, and that's an approach which might make particular sense to people interested in economic history, by reusing concepts from the accountants who were interested, as the data approach to these documents includes, who were interested in balances of incomes and expenses, of liabilities and assets, who created totals to copy them from one book to the next one, from one page to the next one, who created structures, created rubrics and divisions, and calculated subtotals. And making the documents available, I would say that's the very sensible approach to create an iterative drill down into the content of the documents by starting to transcribe, to create databases of these summary data, this aggregated data, and then continuing into the individual entries. In the end, we all know that the individual entries contain much more interesting information than just representation of a monetary amount transferred from one side to the other, but they contain lots of individual informations, which means what is the state of scholarly editions of accounts from my perspective? Maybe people in the audience have different ideas. That we need a kind of double-layered approach in which we combine transcriptions with database style, formal representations of the entries, in which we use semantic web formats and public formats. And I would like to stress on the semantic web formats because they include lots of logics which are really helpful in working with these with the data sets. It's one part of the VeDPH project to provide a basic ontology to describe the single entries and the economic activities, and which I think is the point where everybody could engage, that we don't have to have a fixed workflow from one side to the other, but we could work from it from different ends. And I would hope, and I see that it happens from people in this audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Georg, for this very instructive overview about the state of the art. And I look really forward now to the round table with the following open discussion. And I stop myself immediately and head over to Chiara so we don't lose any time. In the meantime, I will buy some more time from the reception downstairs so they don't throw us out. So, but I know everyone wants to have the Friday evening. So, Chiara.
Okay, yes, it's so round table time now. Okay.
Chiara, if I can start breaking just a little bit to tell to the audience that Richard Goldwaite is here in us, is joining this meeting. I'm very pleased to say it because Goldwaite and Spallanzani are the real base of the reason why we are here today. So, and with them, there is in the audience also Reinhold Müller, that could be defined as the same that Goldwaite and Spallanzani had done for Florence, he had done for Venice. And we hope that the same job will be done in the future also for the Venetian accounting books. So we are really pleased and proud to have them here with us. Sorry for the break.
Thank you, Francesco. I welcome them from all of us, and I'm very delighted also to welcome a panel of major experts in historical studies for the roundtable. During the session, I would like to know their reactions to the Florentine accounting books data sets and also to digital tools. But before the discussion starts, there is an introduction to the economic system in Florence at the time of the census and to the role of accounting sources in Florentine history by Sergio Tognetti. So Sergio is an associate professor at the Department of History at the University of Cagliari, Sardinia, and he's a specialist in medieval economic history. He has been writing extensively on administrative and accounting practices in Renaissance Florence. So I give the word to Sergio. Sergio, please.
Sì, grazie. Ringrazio tutti i partecipanti per avermi permesso di condividere alcune riflessioni che sono appena uscite sulla rivista Reti Medievali Rivista, dove ho pubblicato un saggio intitolato Una civiltà di ragionieri, con un sottotitolo che forse è più esplicativo, cioè Archivi aziendali e distinzione sociale nella Firenze tra basso medioevo e Rinascimento. E qui riprenderò fondamentalmente alcune delle idee che ho condiviso in questo saggio, perché chiaramente quando vediamo il database che ci ha presentato Francesco, rimaniamo colpiti non solo dalla quantità di documentazione contabile presente, che come ha detto Francesco non è tutta, perché c'è tutto il capitolo della contabilità degli enti ecclesiastici e degli ospedali, che è una massa altrettanto importante e che fra l'altro ha costituito la base documentaria fondamentale per lo studio dei prezzi e dei salari nel 300 e nel 400, perché anche in questo ambito la storia di Firenze è straordinariamente privilegiata. Senza i libri di conto dell'ospedale di Santa Maria Nuova, Charles-Marie de la Roncière non avrebbe costruito i suoi grafici sui prezzi e sui salari trecenteschi. Ecco, ma non colpisce soltanto la straordinaria numerosità di questa fonte, ma colpisce anche il confronto con qualsiasi altra città italiana ed europea, perché nessuno potrebbe pensare che i veneziani fossero inferiori ai fiorentini nella gestione dei libri contabili, né i genovesi, forse nemmeno i milanesi. Però il punto fondamentale è che a Firenze e anche in alcune altre città toscane si è conservato molto, mentre altrove questo materiale è stato lasciato andare al macero. Quindi dobbiamo chiederci perché è avvenuto questo. E l'eccezionalità è Firenze, non è Venezia, perché poi anche altrove hanno mandato al macero a Barcellona, per esempio, hanno mandato al macero a Valencia. Insomma, tutti in Europa pensavano che quella documentazione avesse una finalità pratica, terminata la quale si poteva buttare via. A Firenze, in Toscana, ma soprattutto a Firenze, no. Qualcuno ha pensato che quella documentazione avesse un valore che andava molto al di là della utilità pratica, cioè dell'attività economica momentanea. Possiamo molto sinteticamente affermare che questa documentazione contabile costituisce uno degli aspetti fondamentali della memoria storica della città e delle famiglie fiorentine. Quindi le ragioni per questa straordinaria produzione e conservazione sono di due tipi. Uno appunto è quello legato alla produzione dei libri di conto. Perché i fiorentini hanno prodotto così tanti libri di conto? E attenzione, non sono solo libri di conto di grandi aziende, per le quali ovviamente un'ottima gestione amministrativo-contabile è facilmente spiegabile. Ma a Firenze si conservano i libri di conto anche privati, cioè degli individui tenevano i libri di conto per registrare le spese di famiglia. Tenevano i libri di conto i piccoli artigiani. E ci sono piccoli artigiani nel Rinascimento che per gestire una bottega con un giro d'affari molto modesto utilizzavano la partita doppia, mentre magari un grande mercante di Barcellona non lo faceva. Quindi c'è proprio una forma mentis, una cultura professionale che porta alla redazione quantitativamente esorbitante di questi libri di conto. D'altra parte, forse solo a Venezia, accanto a Firenze, esisteva una forma di istruzione professionale totalmente legata al mondo dell'impresa. Questo lo sappiamo benissimo grazie agli studi di Robert Black, di Elisabetta Olivi, cioè a coloro che si sono cimentati sulla quotidianità delle scuole fiorentine. Come erano organizzate queste scuole? Cosa si insegnava? Allora, i fiorentini, e non stiamo parlando semplicemente di piccoli bottegai, artigiani, qui stiamo parlando dell'elite economica della città, che è l'elite politica, non studiava Cicerone, non studiava Seneca. Togliamoci dalla testa che la Firenze del 3, 4, 500 fosse un luogo dove il ceto dirigente si dedicasse agli studi a Humanitatis. No, non è così. I fiorentini andavano a scuola d'Abaco. Tutti i membri delle famiglie più importanti della città andavano a studiare quella che oggi sarebbe ragioneria. Cioè un istituto tecnico commerciale era il punto di riferimento fondamentale per l'istruzione dei giovani fiorentini, che poi naturalmente dovevano andare a fare tirocinio. Chi andava a fare tirocinio in un'azienda di lanaioli, chi andava a fare tirocinio in un'impresa bancaria, chi andava all'estero, chi doveva accontentarsi di una bottega artigiana. Però, diciamo, il curriculum era quello: imparare a leggere e a scrivere, imparare la ragioneria e l'aritmetica commerciale e poi fare il tirocinio in bottega. Quindi tutti i fiorentini alfabetizzati e che avessero un'attività commerciale sapevano tenere i libri di conto come nessun altro in Europa. Questo spiega questa grande diffusione di questo tipo di documenti, che poi ritroviamo, ripeto ancora una volta, negli enti ecclesiastici, negli ospedali, dove spesso l'ente affidava o a un maestro d'abaco o a un mercante la gestione amministrativa della documentazione. Quindi noi troviamo libri di conto, penso per esempio all'ospedale degli Innocenti di Firenze del 400, dove i libri mastri sono tutti in partita doppia e sono tenuti uno consecutivo all'altro, non si è perduto nemmeno un libro mastro. Cioè all'archivio dell'ospedale degli Innocenti ci sono tutti i libri mastri, non se ne è perduto nemmeno uno. Quindi è chiaro che qui c'è una cura quasi ossessiva per la tenuta e la gestione e soprattutto la conservazione dei libri di conto. Insomma, ci sono ragioni oggettive, cioè economiche, ragioni legate all'istruzione, però, diciamo, le ragioni della produzione, nel caso fiorentino, si sposano perfettamente con le ragioni della conservazione. Ora, conservare, archiviare, è un atto che presuppone una presa di coscienza politica, culturale, giuridica. A Firenze si faceva molto fatica a liberarsi di questi libri di conto. Ma perché? Perché spesso i libri di conto hanno a che fare non solo con la storia dell'impresa artigianale, commerciale, finanziaria, ma anche con la storia della famiglia. Cioè a Firenze l'impresa e la famiglia sono quasi la stessa cosa. Non è lo stesso a Genova o a Venezia. Perché? Perché a Genova e a Venezia esistono dei fattori identitari forti che sono extraeconomici. Nel caso veneziano è chiaro, far parte o non far parte della nobiltà, sancita dalla serrata del Maggior Consiglio e dalle varie serrate successive. Quindi esiste a Venezia una leadership collettiva forte. A Firenze non esiste una leadership collettiva forte. Il ceto dirigente è un ceto che conosce dei mutamenti legati alla mobilità sociale molto forte. Di questo ci parla anche Dante, ma ci parlano anche altri uomini di cultura del tempo, cioè ricchezze che si formano, ricchezze che si distruggono, famiglie che hanno successo, famiglie che decadono. Non esiste un paracadute istituzionale che fermi la decadenza o che arresti la crescita di una famiglia. Quindi è tutto molto mobile, la società è molto mobile. Se uno prende gli indici dei nomi delle principali monografie sul ceto politico fiorentino dall'XI secolo fino al XV, più si va avanti e più ci si rende conto che i cognomi cambiano rapidamente, perché c'è un ricambio sociale molto forte. Allora queste famiglie si aggrappano all'archivio che loro custodiscono per certificare il loro passato. Solo che in questa certificazione del loro passato loro amplificano enormemente tutto ciò che ha a che fare con la storia delle loro imprese. E loro ne erano consapevoli probabilmente anche quando gestivano l'impresa stessa. Prima abbiamo visto con Francesco il censimento, a un certo punto c'era un campo riferito agli esercizi, no? Esercizio A, esercizio B, esercizio C, che sta ad indicare il primo esercizio, secondo esercizio, terzo esercizio e via dicendo. Ora, però le imprese dopo un tot di anni cambiano ragione sociale, cambiano i soci, quindi teoricamente bisognava anche interrompere la sequenza delle lettere, no? La sequenza alfabetica. Invece a Firenze troviamo libri contabili, esercizi di libri contabili come S, T, V, Z. Poi quando si arriva in fondo si comincia a intitolare i libri contabili come AA, BB, CC, cioè si ricomincia l'alfabeto da capo. Ma questi che stanno tenendo i libri sono i bisnipoti, i trisnipoti di quelli che hanno iniziato l'impresa, che però hanno un senso genealogico molto forte dell'azienda stessa. Cioè l'azienda diventa un fattore identitario quasi principale nella storia delle famiglie fiorentine. Ora, ovviamente non c'è tempo, ma ci sono tantissimi libri di ricordanze fiorentini che hanno ovviamente un andamento molto narrativo, anche se hanno dei collegamenti molto forti con i libri di conto. Comunque in questi libri di ricordanze, non di rado, l'autore dice: ho letto nelle carte, nei libri di mio padre, di mio nonno, di mio bisnonno, ma queste carte spesso sono atti costitutivi di compagnia, cause nel Tribunale della Mercanzia e soprattutto libri mastri. Cioè queste persone conservavano i libri mastri perché reputavano queste fonti elementi strutturali dell'identità familiare. E questo aspetto, cioè il collegamento tra la famiglia, l'archivio familiare, l'impresa, ha salvato dalla dispersione tutta questa documentazione. Perché anche quando in Toscana si è affermata una leadership collettiva forte, cioè con il Granducato, anche ha, come dire, congelato la mobilità sociale, ha stabilito chi era nobile e chi non era nobile, però tutte queste famiglie, anche nel 500, nel 600, nel 700, si facevano vanto di avere un passato repubblicano, cioè erano orgogliosi del fatto che i propri antenati avessero avuto un ruolo nella storia della Repubblica Fiorentina. Noi abbiamo avuto priori tra i nostri antenati. Noi abbiamo ricoperto queste cariche pubbliche nel 300, nel 200. Noi siamo stati mercanti nel 400 e nel 300. E così tutte queste famiglie, anche quando avevano dismesso completamente gli investimenti negli affari, penso soprattutto al XVIII secolo, si sono guardati bene dal disfarsi dei propri archivi. Li hanno conservati fino all'ultimo. Poi alcuni si sono dispersi perché la famiglia si è estinta, però molte famiglie hanno conservato nel loro palazzo principale l'archivio familiare contenente soprattutto carte aziendali. Cito in conclusione un esempio che mi è capitato anche di studiare. A Firenze esiste un Lungarno che si chiama Lungarno Serristori. Sul Lungarno Serristori c'è ancora oggi il grande palazzo della famiglia Serristori. Ora il nucleo principale è di inizio 500, anche se ci sono stati ampliamenti nei secoli successivi. Ebbene, questa famiglia ha conservato fino agli anni 70 del secolo scorso l'archivio familiare nel palazzo. Quell'archivio è costituito in larghissima parte da libri di conto, ma la cosa più incredibile è che il documento più antico di questo archivio è, ciao Raini, sei apparso, un'apparizione mariana. Ma il pezzo più importante, più antico dell'archivio Serristori è un resoconto finanziario stilato da 3 o 4 ragionieri che si dovevano occupare di portare a termine la spartizione di un asse ereditario. Quindi questi ragionieri cosa avevano fatto? Avevano preso in mano i libri mastri delle imprese, avevano deciso cosa aspettava all'uno e cosa aspettava all'altro e avevano prodotto un report finanziario. Questo report finanziario fu copiato su pergamena, non su carta, su pergamena, tutto bello rilegato, e questo documento, questo rapporto finanziario relativo a un lodo arbitrale, quindi una questione di cui nessuno poteva interessarsi nel 500, nel 600, nel 700, è il pezzo più antico di tutto l'archivio Serristori. Ora, questi esempi si potrebbero moltiplicare per altri archivi fiorentini, ma è ovvio, è evidente che la conservazione di questa massa documentaria è legata alla straordinaria importanza che queste famiglie davano all'archivio aziendale, cioè l'azienda percepita come un fattore identitario della storia della famiglia, e quindi l'azienda è stata percepita per secoli come una sorta di stampella anche dell'azione politica di queste famiglie stesse. Quindi quello che troviamo a Firenze è qualcosa di straordinariamente particolare, perché l'importanza data all'azienda per l'identità familiare altrove non esiste, e quindi si spiega per quale motivo a Venezia, a Genova, a Barcellona, a Valencia, a Lisbona tutto questo materiale è stato mandato al macero. Va bene, mi fermo qui e vi ringrazio.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for this very important reconstruction of the historical context. So we understood that the educational and the social environment in Tuscany, or in Florence in Tuscany, explains the cultural value given to the accounting books. And so the documents, there was an important production of documents, accounting documents, and also their preservation in time, because accounting books represented sorts of family and the families and firms' memories, okay, and also the identity, as you said. Thank you very much. Very important. Thank you. So now we started the roundtable discussion. So I would like to hear from our outstanding guests how the census, the database, can help the work of historians, and how it relates to their own research and disciplines. And more generally, I would like to ask them which is the state of art of future perspectives of digital research and accounting books and similar archival materials. So I would start giving the floor to an important accounting scholar.
Chiara, microphone is off.
Da quanto?
Okay, no, 5 seconds.
5 seconds. So I was talking about what?
You were introducing about the importance of digitalization.
Yes, I'm introducing Alan Sangster. Okay, I wanted to say that I'm very happy because I never met him personally. So it is a pleasure for me. And I will introduce him to you. Alan is a professor of accounting history at the University of Aberdeen. And among his academic interests, he is doing research on accounting practices and education in Italy from the 13th century and on Luca Pacioli. Okay, so Alan, can you tell us how, according to your opinion, the database, the census, can help accounting historians?
Yes, I'll do my best. I'm going to talk basically I understood I could talk for about 10 minutes. So I'll just go through what I was going to do. And it answers your question and the questions and the rest of them. I was very interested to hear about what's happened here, about the plans to make all this information available in a central source. And for the hope that it can link into the digitized copies of the original documents in the way that the Datini archive is going at the moment. For me, as an accounting historian, that is fundamentally useful, extremely useful, to have if you like, an electronic index and the digital image. And it would save me lots of trips to Italy, or at least I could come to Italy for other reasons than going to an archive. So I really hope that this develops, and that what we hope happens in the future does happen, and that the census continues to be developed and expanded to cover all forms of entity. Again, as an accounting historian, I'm interested in what governments do in their accounting. I'm interested in what charities do in their accounting, what churches do in their accounting, not just businesses. And that it's kept updated, and where required, the entries are corrected if they're slightly out of sync. There is one thing I'd say at the very end, as a suggestion. I'll keep it to the end. Now, I believe that with this resource, census, and what I've just described, it has a potential to restart, and I mean that sincerely, restart studies in medieval accounting history, particularly in the English language. Speaking as an accounting historian, when accounting historians look at medieval records like these, they do so in a very different way from scholars of other disciplines. Accounting historians are fixated with identifying the bookkeeping method, describing it, and then assessing how good it is from a teleological perspective. Accounting historians do not generally assess the merits of the bookkeeping in the context of the needs that it serves. Those needs are assumed to be the same as today, that's a teleological perspective, and it extends from the entries for transactions, the way they're done, to the calculation of profit and preparation of a statement of wealth. If the medieval bookkeeper did not prepare a profit and loss account and a balance sheet with appropriately adjusted figures for expenditure, income, assets that reflect the periodicity of accounting and the need to match income and expenditure, then the bookkeeping and financial reporting was deemed inadequate by accounting historians to meet the needs of business, because they're assumed to be the same as today. And that has impacted all of this field in my discipline for over 100 years, that perspective. As part of this situation, with few notable exceptions, and there are some medieval accounting historians who really do an excellent job at looking at things from a more balanced perspective. Accounting historians looking at medieval account books seldom look in any great detail at the business and the practices of the business and the practices of that business as revealed in the account books. It's almost the complete opposite of what everyone else is doing. Nor do they typically consider much of the context surrounding a business, a context that would normally be expected to impact business and business practice, and also bookkeeping practice. The business needs met by the preparation of account records and books are rarely considered. Accounting historians generally in English language at least, and to a large extent from what I've read in Italian, just don't do that. Because they're assumed to be the same as today. The medieval account books are thus studied by accounting historians in isolation. This is partly because medieval bookkeeping is viewed as, in effect, a form of prehistory, before things became interesting with the start of the Industrial Revolution. I've never, for example, read a detailed analysis of Florentine costing practice in the 14th century in a study by accounting historians that looked into the origins of costing practice. Everything starts in the industrial period. This approach was established by the historians of accounting in a 100-year period up to around 1980. And its impact on medieval accounting history can be summed up in a statement made by Raymond de Roover in 1958 that effectively closed the door on accounting historians studying medieval bookkeeping practice. What he said was, medieval bookkeepers often did queer things. Perhaps they had good reasons for doing what they did, but we no longer understand their practices because we have a different point of view and accounting has progressed since the Middle Ages. It was 100% teleological. And that's exactly sums up how this branch of history has developed in accounting. Now, I believe he was wrong. Accounting historians were looking for the wrong thing. If they look at why bookkeepers did what they did, rather than comparing what they did with what is done today, it is relatively easy to understand their practice. I find it much easier than it would seem in the literature, for example, to look at what Datini's bookkeepers are doing and understand why they're doing it, just because I'm throwing away this teleological background. For various reasons, accounting historians tend to take Pacioli's treatise on double entry bookkeeping as a starting point. Well, they can read it in English for a start, so it's straightforward. The medieval account records have been studied sufficiently in the view of most accounting historians. We know where we know where things got to by 1494. Early modern bookkeeping practice is then considered in the context of Pacioli's rendition, seldom compared to actual medieval practice. So we don't use the resources in the archives. The types of resources that the census is presenting to us are not used. And I think the census's existence will make a difference to that. With the creation of the census, at a glance, it is easier for accounting historians to find material of interest. The links to digitized copies, as I said, of even a small subset of census would dramatically change what can be done. There's no longer any need to travel anywhere, and particularly this time, in this time we're in at the moment, that's particularly important. But is there any prospect of accounting historians becoming medieval accounting historians and beginning to work in this far more accessible environment? Because there are very, very few medieval accounting historians. So how can we convert more to have a look at this? But I think we need to first look to Italy, to the large community of accounting historians, and there's a large community. The language that all these account records are written in is an essential component if research is to progress at speed. I am not fluent in Italian. I can get by just. I can understand a bit of what's said in Italian to me. And I have found that my work is very slow in progressing when I'm looking at the old records, because I've firstly got to think about, well, what's the Italian of that? And what do these words mean? It's a much slower process, whereas the people who've got Italian at the beginning can make a much faster job of it. There's a need to be possible to learn how to read the Mercantesca script. That for me is a huge barrier. It's a skill taught far less to accounting students everywhere than it was in the past, but particularly in Italy, from what I'm told by my colleagues. However, doctoral students in accounting history, properly trained, would find the opportunities presented by the census more than enough for several lifetimes. And I hope someone wakes up and realizes that. The digitalized collection would lend itself to the development of artificial intelligence-based systems to read them. So once everything's digitized, we can get to some machine learning in place that actually reads them. And once that's done, the barriers come down. I'm not talking about tomorrow. I'm not talking about next year or even the next decade. But hopefully in my lifetime, I'll see someone develop a system that can read Mercantesca script. We'll see. Researching how bookkeeping is used to serve the needs of medieval business would, I believe, represent a new field of research for accounting historians. It would open up the doors to working with economic historians and business historians, and to publishing in their journals, which are highly respected by us, although we hardly ever publish in them, as well as those journals that specialize in accounting history. That, I think, and hope, is what the census and its digitization could bring to accounting history, a vastly greater field of study, one that accounting historians would recognize is far from done and dusted by Pacioli. Finally, the one thing that I wanted to mention, I referred to earlier, the census does not include the Ferolfi account book from 1299 to 1300. The Ferolfi company was Florentine and operated in Sabon in Provence. To accounting historians, that is the most important medieval account book, absolutely without exception, because it's recognized as the first example of an entity-wide bookkeeping system in double entry that covered everything that you would expect. It was about 200 years, well, it was arguably 200 years ahead of its time, and it was certainly 100 years ahead of its time, because what the bookkeeper was doing there, Martino Manucci, was in every way as good as what Simone Belandi did for Datini in Pisa. It was exceptionally good bookkeepers. Those are the people that accounting historians want to start with, looking at. So if it's possible to make an exception to the rules whereby this database, the census, excludes Ferolfi because it's in France, could it please be brought into this census so that accounting historians will see a benefit? And once they see this magnet in this database, they'll start looking around and they'll see the other things they could look at that might be of interest as well. That's my talk. So thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. I would like to say immediately that if the census is open source and is ready to accept new and data that are now not included at the moment in the database. So it's good that we start immediately to receive new additions and improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Your microphone, Chiara, is
the same. Thanks a lot. I was saying, I was thanking Alan for his stimulating contribution. And okay, we had to move from the traditional accounting history to a digital one with a lot of, how can we say, it will be an important transition too. So as a second contribution, I would ask John to intervene. John Paget is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago, and he's a prominent figure in the field of social networks. Among other things, he has been systematically exploring in the last decades the emergence of organization and markets in Renaissance Florence. I give the floor to John. John, please, are you with us?
You have to unmute your microphone, John.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to confine my remarks to 2 points in the interest of time. Point number 1 is what is the relationship between this Bettarini data set and its predecessor by Richard Goldthwaite and Marco Spallanzani. And the second point is sort of what interest does this data set open up and provide in terms of research topics that I'm particularly interested in. The first point about the predecessor of this document, Massimo mentioned at the very beginning, and Francesco repeated fairly recently, that this is not actually the first effort to go through these archival records and construct a census of account books. If you go on Richard Goldthwaite's academia.edu page, you'll see a 195-page Word document, which has many of the same entry, went through the same documents and produced a source that's quite parallel. So the question to rise is, why does Francesco do this all over again? Is he just reinventing the wheel, or what is the actual innovation in what Francesco did as compared to his predecessor? And I think it's worth mentioning that there's the answer is breadth versus depth, I would say. If you look at the number of companies that are covered in these two respective data sets, the old-fashioned Word document and the newer Excel sheet sort of format, there are far more companies in the Goldthwaite data set than there are in the Bettarini data set. And so that's, breadth-wise, there's more companies covered there. But, the reason is pretty straightforward, really, is that Francesco Bettarini stops in 1500. Whereas Richard Goldthwaite carries on for another century beyond that. And there's a sort of an exponential increase in the number of account books that are survived over this sort of time period. So if you're interested in something in the 1500s, you have to go to I'll call the first edition of this data set, which is this old-fashioned sort of Word compilation. But the innovation that Francesco has done is on the depth front. That's why he did all of this work. Richard Goldthwaite and Marco Spallanzani's system is based on companies. So you have a case as a company. So you have you don't have the separate account books itemized within the company. It's just, it's source number one, source number two, source number three, source. They don't mention that it's a ricordanze or entrada in uscita or mastro or whatever. There's nothing about the account books themselves. It's about the companies, but it's using account books to construct sort of a bit. And that move, if you remember Francesco's opening presentation, most of the interesting stuff has to do with the books themselves, the account books, not with the companies that sort of made them. And so all of this information is present. There's just many. There's only 4 or 5 columns in the Goldthwaite data set. There's 50 columns in the Bettarini data set. So there's much more qualitative information about exactly what type of account book and the partners involved, all of that stuff that Francesco presented is not in the first edition. But nonetheless, you should bear in mind that there is a first edition, the Goldthwaite version. There's a second edition, the Bettarini version, and anyone who's going to do a serious research using these things, be well advised to look at both. Actually, they're both online and they're both present. So, and just double check and so forth and so on. But nonetheless, anything that is in the Goldthwaite Spallanzani data set before 1500, that is in Francesco's data set. It's not that Francesco didn't include. It's just that Richard goes on for another 100 years beyond where the Bettarini data set leaves off. Okay, so that's number one. I just want to remind everybody that there's a first edition and a second edition, and please look at both versions, and just do your due diligence in the use of these things. My second point is more substantive. What type of questions do I think this new data source reveals that is of interest to me? And I'll just mention 2, the history of accounting itself. I'm not really an accounting scholar. I'm a social networks sort of scholar. But nonetheless, on the accounting side itself, I think Massimo got interested in this project in the first place by what he called the idea of the assembly of accounting. In other words, don't just fixate on, okay, this is double entry or that is not double entry and so forth, but break it down into various components and, measure little components one by one. And then you can see how they're put together in different ways before the days of double entry bookkeeping and the standardized approach, you know, because there's a lot of heterogeneity in the Trecento in the 1300s before it sort of locks in to sort of double entry soon thereafter. And you can trace the evolution of, and maybe different streams of evolution. An example is that I used Goldthwaite's data set for is in one of my projects, I traced the diffusion of something called contrapposto, you know, the debits on one side and credits on the other side, just the physical appearance of these debits on one side and credits on the other side. You know, that's not all of double entry bookkeeping, obviously, but it's one little component, you know, the Sistema Veneziana, they call it in sort of Florence. And I sort of used Richard's first edition to sort of go through and trace the diffusion of that particular measure, contrapposto, over time. And it turns out that it was a complete step function. You know, it was nothing like that in Florence until a very specific date, 1383. And then like within 10 or 15 years, it had diffused throughout the entire account book system. You know, it's a very, very sudden sort of adoption, you know, and you could do that sort of exercise for other elements, not just contrapposto, but for a whole system of elements. And you could sort of see, and I had a story about why that particular date had to do with the partnership system and my discovery that Datini was not unique. There was eight companies that adopted the same contrapposto system simultaneously with Datini. You know, he's just famous because of the records that survived, but it was a system-wide thing that Datini was reflecting. And the second example, research that I find would be very, very interesting to pursue with Francesco's database is the following, is that this idea of census, you know, it's a census of account books that have survived, yes, but it's hardly a census of firms that existed in Florence at the time or account books that existed in Florence at the time. And, you know, what about all the stuff that's been lost? You know, can you get any insight into what has been lost in this time? I went through Francesco in a different project, has gone through and done these business censuses based on catasti, 1427, 1433, 1458 catasti. And these are complete lists of all businesses that existed at those particular three time points. And if you compare the account book system first edition with these 1427 lists, you see that out of 400 companies, major companies, you know, there are 4 companies that have any account book surviving from that time period. That doesn't mean that's 1%. And, you know, it doesn't mean 1% of account books are survived. 1% of companies that had any account book survived. So if each company had 4, that's 0.25% of account books that survived, you know? So you have to pay attention to, is this a random sample? Is this a skewed sample? You know, what's the nature of the data that you don't see? In any event, if you took Francesco's data set, you know, you could start to answer that question by clustering, finding years in which there's a whole high density of overlapping, you know, account books that sort of refer to each other, and then you could code those internet network of business, you know, creditory, debitory, and you could get a sense not only of the ones that wrote the books, but all the other people referred to in the books. And you could cross connect these things to develop, you know, an idea of business census, you know, try to reconstruct what we have magically in these catasti for other time periods. You know, we have these magic business censuses for the 3 years I mentioned, but there are many. What about the other years? You know, you could use Francesco's list as the foundation for getting a sense of a sample, getting a sense of what's missing and tracing business activity, not just, so, you know, to me, there's this history of accounting interest, and there's this history of business activity interests that are both sort of this work that Francesco did, you know, going deep rather than, I support. I'm glad he cut it off at 1500. I'd rather have the deeper probe than just continuing on out into the next century. And there's a lot of research that's enabled by this second edition that was not enabled by the first edition, although some was enabled by the first edition. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thanks, a very stimulating contribution to the talk. A lot. Sorry, I go fast because it is very late, very, very late, and believe that the speakers, the talk are the very important part of, the most important part of the symposium. So now is the turn of Dorit. Dorit Reines is an associate professor at the Department of Humanities at Foscari, and she's doing research and teaching on the history of archives, family history, and history of libraries with a special reference to Venice from the 14th to the 18th century. Dorit, I would like to ask you if you see ways of relating the Italian accounting data set, the census, with other historical data sets to be used in historical research.
No, I didn't get this, the last part.
Yeah, I would like to ask you if you see ways to relate the Italian accounting data sets with the other historical data sets.
Yes, I'm I'm going to refer to Venice because this is what I'm working on. I'm usually not into accounting history, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. But what I've seen, from what I know, is this. What really interests me is two things. First of all, as everybody has said, for Venice, we have a lot less of accounting books. I think that 2 years ago, there was an article that was published on an accounting book by the Soranzo Fraterna. Now, this is what I'm interested in, because I'm interested in the Fraterna from the social point of view, but to see also accounting books. You know that Fraterna, usually in Venice, we usually don't know when the Fraterna was established. We know when it's breaking off because it has to. There is a sort of juridical instance that where the Fraterna breaks. So what interests me here is to see exactly from the business point of view exactly how the Fraterna was managed. The second thing that interests me most is the relationship between, for example, if we had more accounting books, the import and export of various materials and items. For example, some years ago, I worked with another student of mine on extracting from inventories all the kitchen items that were from over 400 years. And this can be very interesting to understand exactly, for example, for Venice, what was important or exported at a certain point of time, to see why at a certain point in the kitchens appear various items that we haven't had before. Why that? Or for example, the books, the book industry, why, for example, the Venetian paper, we have done some let's say, experiments on that. Why is it more white? Why is it whiter than the others? And the explanation is that there is a lot of minerals that are there that are not, for example, in other German or Swiss or French. So was there an importation of these minerals to Venice in order to use them? I mean, when the printing press starts, so we would have a lot of these minerals. I don't know exactly whether there was or not. This is only probably with the accounting books that we can find them. So all of these are aspects that I would expect, of course. I mean, for Florence, you would have much more than for Venice. Perhaps Raini can tell us much more about this. The second thing, but I don't know whether we have time for this, is that I asked Dr. Stephen White to, because Massimo Warglien gave him some pages of the Datini ledger, and he was trying to see whether he can work with that for an automatic transcription. I don't know if Steve is still with us.
I'm
Yes,
afraid
I'm still here.
I'm afraid we have to set up a second symposium on automatic or handwritten text recognition. So I announced already, so it's an awkward situation because the alarm is going to start here when we do not leave in 10 minutes. So the three of us, Francesco, Massimo, and me, you can continue for another while, but please not until midnight. But we definitely have to leave. So the three of us. So Chiara, you will be host then, and you will be able to close. But so don't worry if we disappear. But yeah. So that was the maximum I was able to negotiate. Another 10 minutes here. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry about it, but yeah.
So you mean that we can go on with the Stephen White too, and then with the Giovanni? Sorry, Giovanni, you have one.
I mean, I'm serious about setting up another symposium. Is really an option. There's too much ground to cover. I don't know if you a short note, Stephen. Absolutely, please, but very short, and then we should go on, even if we have left with the other roundtable participants, I would say.
So would you like, Dorit, sorry, would you like we finish with Giovanni Favero? Okay, that he's a colleague of mine. He's a kind colleague of mine. And so we complete, and then we can go back to Stephen White. What do you think?
I think that Steve, I think that John Paget as well knows exactly what, and Massimo, I think that it is worthwhile, of course, with Georg Vogeler, that I was very impressed with what he was doing, perhaps to have another meeting only on approaching semi-automatic transcription or other approaches, the digital humanities approaches to accounting books. I think so, yes.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Dorit.
Just one thing, I would like to say something off the side of digital automatic transcription, okay? And that's actually for the virtual research environment, which is something different and a little bit closer to what you guys are talking about. So anyway, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so Giovanni Favero is the last one. And because he's, as I told you, a colleague of mine, he's full professor at the Department of Management of Foscari. He's an historian, especially interested in history of statistics and accounting. Among his research interests, we find accounting history in different periods, accounting fraud in particular, and Benedetto Cotrugli's book. Okay, Giovanni, are you here?
Yes.
Can you tell us something about, ciao. How we manage the scarcity when we have scarce resources as accounting books, as it is in the Venetian archive. Okay, which strategy can you suggest?
Thank you, Chiara. I will try to be short, as I have understood that there is not much time left. As my experience as an accounting historian is limited to some specific entrances into Cotrugli's book, where accounting was mostly conceived as a way of legitimation for the activity of the merchant. And more recently, I was studying together with Marisa Agostini and Riccardo Cella another case in the Venetian 18th century, so not in the medieval period, but it is useful perhaps to summarize it very rapidly here in order to show how there are differences not only in the preservation and the production of accounting books between Venice and Florence, as Sergio Tognetti highlighted before, but probably also in the purpose and use of accounting in Venice. My sensation is that the family was really more important in Venice, in Florence than in Venice, as Sergio highlighted, but also in Venice there was a different use of accounts to highlight profit more than debt and credit. And it is, and somehow the uses of account, the accounting books with the accounting was not classified or not collected into books until the company or the society was closed. The surviving examples we have are not so many, even if I was told by Franz, Massimo, and Francesco that Rainy Müller was able to identify a lot of them, more than expected in the Venetian archives. I am mentioning my experience about the 18th century case because it was showing us the uses of accounting that were made in that period. The case was focusing on a company producing ceramics very close to San Giobbe, at the Crea stop. The company was owned by the Cozzi brothers, and it was established together with a former creditor of them, Marinoni. And this is the interesting part. They established a new company with the former creditor, and basically the creditor entered the company in order to be reimbursed of the debt. He appointed an accountant, and the accountant basically started tunneling liquidity towards one of the partners until the company crisis. Accounting techniques in that case were used to pretend there was profit where it did not exist. Because the company did not have profits actually, but profits were to be used to reimburse the debt. So the creditor appointed the accountant in order to show profits and make him reimburse it. But liquidity was finishing, so they had a litigation. They claimed the authority, and the Inquisitore alle Arti intervened. It was like an exceptional auditor for that accounts, because he was Andrea Tron, one of the most powerful noblemen in Venice at the time. And the auditing revealed that actually there were no profits there. So the rights of the creditor were falling behind in that moment. But what is interesting is that no sanctions were applied for what we would call fraud, accounting fraud today. And instead, a new arrangement between the partners was imposed in order to somehow allow the continuation of the company. This is interesting for many issues. One is how accounting techniques were used for purposes of distribution of income and wealth, and on the other side, how accounting techniques were used by the authority to show how things should go for the general interest, and not so much for the interest of one part against the other. An insight that is useful from that we took from this for further research was that this case suggests that accounting documents in Venice may be more easy to find in the litigation records or the records about requests or claims in the archives of public authorities concerning trade and manufacturing, as the Cinque Savi alla Mercanzia or the Inquisitori alle Arti. And here, if you want, what Sergio was saying about the role of leadership, the role of the leadership of the state, of the nobility which identified with the state, is stronger in Venice than in other places. You can find it also at documentary level. I'm not sure that this is valid for all the periods of the Venetian Republic and for all the cases. But what is important is that it is in this way you have accounting records that, as Alan was saying, are more in context, because you have accounting documents together with all the related documentation explaining why these records were kept, sometimes why they were asked to be produced by the authorities in order to assess which kind of issues and for which purposes. So this is an approach that I suggest in order to multiply our documentation and also to see their meanings. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a good, thanks for the solution suggested.
It's not a solution.
Not really solution, but the inspiration. Okay, and Giovanni, okay, now at the moment I can see only some people here and the number is decreasing. So I don't know, would you like, we consider some questions from the participants to the seminar? I can see some persons still here. If there is someone that would like to make a questions, okay, here is, I really want to think, okay, now I can see. If you want to ask questions, please unmute your microphone, or in case, okay, if we don't have questions, we can, let me see if there are questions. Thank you, okay. Now, okay, so we will have another, okay, as we said before, we will have in the future, we will have another symposium, okay, to go on. And so I believe that now we are over time completely. So I believe it has been a fruitful session, very fruitful section. And I thanks a lot the distinguished guests we had here today. And they gave us a sort of, we can say, research perspective from different angles, and that surely enrich each of us. Okay, so I thank you very much, all of you, and the participants too, to be so patient, to be here with us, and see you again another time, okay? So see you.